Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. I'm Bridget Anderson, the President and CEO of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, and welcome to our Business Resiliency series, Navigating COVID-19. Today, we'll be focusing on initiatives to help Greater Vancouver businesses and the pivot to recovery with the Minister of Economic Development and Official Languages, the Honourable Mélanie Joly. In this time of unprecedented uncertainty, we want to ensure that members of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade and the broader business community can find answers to their most pressing questions. Through a series of free webinars, experts will provide guidance and answer questions to help companies navigate the next step. We encourage you to take part in this discussion, and you can engage with us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram by using the hashtag GVBOT. We are also using Slido for today's discussion, so you can submit your questions, and you can do this in your internet browser or on your phone by going to the website slido.com and enter the code GVBOT Min Joly. Before we start, and especially in these challenging times, we want to thank our long-standing sponsors called our Pillar Partners. They include TELUS, YVR, Air Canada, CN, and BCIT. We are very grateful for the support of these 5 organizations whose annual partnerships and commitments enable the work of the Board of Trade. Thank you as well to our preferred media partner, Business in Vancouver. Now today we are joined by the Honourable Mélanie Joly, Minister of Economic Development and Official Languages. In her ministerial roles, Minister Joly has worked to promote Canadian culture and to grow and increase the visibility of Canada's tourism sector. She has also worked to safeguard Canada's 2 official languages while promoting the use of French in Canada and around the world, including in the digital sphere. Welcome to you, Minister, and I'm going to start if you'd like to make a couple of comments first and let us know some of the latest information regarding the pandemic and how the government is addressing some of those challenges, and then we'll go to a question and answer period. Thank you for joining us.
Pleasure. Well, thank you, Bridget. Thank you all for being on this important conversation. First and foremost, I wanted to talk about what we're doing as a government, as we're trying to make sure that, can you hear me, sorry?
Yes, I'm able to hear you and we can see you now.
Okay, perfect, thank you. So the government right now, obviously our main efforts are all to make sure that we contain the spread of the virus and that we can protect the health of Canadians all across the country, and we can save lives. So our overall objective is always to do just that. The second thing also, obviously, while we're making sure that people are really following the very stringent measures, what we decided to do was to make sure that nobody would fall into the cracks of the system, that nobody would be forgotten. And therefore, we decided to go ahead and really expand our social safety net. Now, the federal government at this point doesn't have time to develop new programs because our entire workforce is right now teleworking. I think that Joyce Murray, also from Vancouver, is on this important Zoom conference, and with Ron McCrimmon, and also with Ken Hardy, my colleagues. But the idea was to make sure that while we are working with our public service, we wanted to have to use the EI program to expand it massively. So if you are if you're self-employed, if you don't have enough hours under the EI system, if your kids are at home because school is out, or because you're ill, or you have a family member to take care of, well, obviously we want to take care of you, and that's why we came up with the Canada Emergencies response benefit, the famous $2,000 per month for a period of 4 months. Now, that was our first response, and obviously the Canada Child benefits are increased by $300 per children, and also we are sending tax credits, GST tax credits, and people will be receiving checks in the coming weeks. Now, following that, after expanding the social safety net, we decided to go ahead with our economic response. And at the beginning of the crisis, the reading of the federal government regarding what was happening was really the fact that we could see that many companies would go through a crush of their liquidities, because there was the demand was just being moved by potentially a couple of months, that people would not be selling goods or services for a couple of months, and then eventually this would just start back. And so what we wanted to do was really to use our banking system to make it way more flexible, to make sure that ultimately people could have better interest rates or terms of repayments. And that's why we decided to enact a mechanism that would allow $300 billion to flow through our banking system, and we decided to support more the BDC and EDC. And so that was our first response. And then bit by bit, well, we were seeing that our SMEs were suffering, and that basically there were real strains on the system. Well, we wanted to go ahead with a broader measure, and that's why we came up with the wage subsidy. The wage subsidy is now, as you know, 75% of wages that can be supported to a maximum of $58,700 per person. And also, you have to show that there's 30% of losses. Bridget, I can take questions on that issue. Obviously, I'm convinced members will have questions about it, and we can have a conversation about it. Also, what we decided to do, well, we knew that fixed costs are an issue. We wanted to play our part as the federal government, and therefore we deferred the repayments of GST and all important taxes and custom duties to later this year, pretty much the end of the year. And we wanted to make sure that corporate taxes would be repaid later in the year, because we know that right now businesses are looking at their burning rate. We know that there's a cash crunch, and we want to make sure that they have the most money possible to go through this crisis. And finally, for smaller businesses, we came up with a new form of loan, and it's $40,000. It's a $40,000 loan. If repaid within the next 2 years, businesses can keep 10,000 of it, so it becomes a 10,000 subsidy, and that's also to make sure that we can help with the liquidity issues. So all that to say, Minister Morneau has been working not only extremely hard, but we've been working at a fast pace, because we wanted to make sure that we would be adapting as a reading of the crisis was changing, and we could see the impact of our economy, on our economy and on our businesses. What we're laser focused right now, and what I would love to hear from you and your members, is how are these measures landing? How is it really impacting your businesses? How do, for example, banks are open to be more flexible? We've taken more risk on the parts of the federal, on the shoulders of the federal government. Banks should be out there taking more risks also. So is that the case? How is it going with BDC, with EDC? And, how can we make sure that we can help businesses? Because at the end of the day, the way we're helping businesses right now will help us through the recovery. And we know that, and we want to make sure that in the recovery phase, well, no one is not only left behind, but we don't increase inequalities, that we can help our middle class and everybody working hard to join it to really be well taken care of while we're bouncing back as a country and throughout our communities. So Bridget, I've talked enough. I'm there to answer questions. So let's have a
Minister, I do appreciate that was a very comprehensive overview, and I really do think that your government should be commended for how quickly you have acted and put some measures in place. And we'll start with the 75% wage subsidy because that is one that is a particular priority to many of the Board of Trade members. And really the question is about accessing the funds. So recognizing that details were coming out still yesterday, what is the timeline for people to get these funds? You know, April 1st was just yesterday, and so a lot of bills are due for a lot of members. And they're looking ahead and they might only have, you said, a cash crunch, and that's definitely, they might only have cash reserves to allow them to continue operating for a matter of days or weeks. So the funds need to get into their hands right away. What does that timeline look like now?
So we're working extremely hard on it. I think that the idea is to do it through the CRA, the Canada Revenue Agency. And the Minister of Finance, Bill Morneau, has said between 3 and 6 weeks. So that's the idea. Obviously, we're trying to get more to 3 weeks than 6 weeks. But we're all hands on deck right now on this. And that's why we're really pushing hard to make sure that that is happening as quick as possible. We're confident also that the CRA will be able to deal with this. Usually this would be, you know, the tax time of the year. A lot of people are deferring their tax payments and therefore not filing their taxes. So we know that we have the firepower necessary to deal with this issue, and while also dealing with the other emergency benefit that will be starting April 6th, and I can answer questions about that too.
And a lot of members have also asked about some further details on how to show the 30% reduction in revenue. And I understand that that will be calculated mid-month to mid-month, so mid-March to mid-April, and then businesses need to reapply for mid-April to mid-May, etc. And for some businesses, it's difficult for them to do that because of the way that their revenue is calculated, because some of them maybe had only just come into existence within the last few months. So is your government open to broadening what that criteria is?
I think this is exactly the information, Bridget, we need right now. It's not as if the government doesn't want to pay wage subsidies. We came up with this program because we believe that's the best way to keep our business afloat. 2 weeks ago, it was a 10% wage subsidy. Because of our conversation, Bridget, you know, earlier last week, and many conversations I had across the country, and my colleagues and I, the Minister of Small Businesses, Mary Ying, and I had, we obviously saw that we had to increase the wage subsidy. And so we're now at 75%. I know that, for example, seasonal businesses are raising the flag, or startups are raising the flag. So if you have any recommendations, please feel free to send them. And we want to make sure that we can, you know, look at all options to tweak a bit our response to make it more available to people, to businesses across the country.
And I think one of the changes that was very much appreciated was that this subsidy was available to all sizes of business.
Yes.
One other area I want to ask about is in regards to commercial lease payments or rents. You know, a lot of businesses were really having a difficult time yesterday knowing that rent was due and looking, they didn't have a lot of cash on hand. So what kind of support has your government offered, or will you consider offering further support to help offset those kinds of costs?
So I was referring a bit earlier to the burning rate of businesses, maybe because I'm a former entrepreneur myself. So I'm very much aware that fixed costs are extremely difficult, and it depends on the type of business you have also. Wages, subsidies are you know, always a good thing when you have lots of, you're in the service industry, for example, and your biggest fixed cost is your wages, is the cost of your workforce. So what we've done is, within the powers we had, was to also make sure that the GST repayments or you know, the custom duties for exporters and importers could really be deferred on a longer period. That way, people would have access to more money and you know, basically keep more money in their pockets. On the rent issue, this is a provincial jurisdiction, and so I really hope that the province also will go ahead and support our businesses, because at this point, the federal government needs to play its role, and I profoundly think that that's what we're doing. The province also, and the municipalities, so the city of Vancouver. I had a good conversation with Kennedy Stewart, but that was a month ago. That seems like years ago. And I was in Vancouver at that time. Actually, that's the last trip I did before going back to Ottawa, and we've been dealing with this issue since then. But that being said, I think on the rent issue, it's really a conversation with the province and potentially also the municipality with this greater city of Vancouver. And for the rest, we'll be working also collaboratively with all levels of government.
And I know it is something that the BC government is looking very closely at. The Greater Vancouver Board of Trade is part of the BC government's economic task force that they put together. And just this morning we were on a call, and that was one of the many topics we were talking about. So understanding that it is something that the BC government is looking at. We're going to go to societal questions in just a moment, but first I want to ask you about tourism. That's another one of your areas of responsibility. And before the COVID-19 pandemic really hit home for us, you had unveiled the federal tourism growth strategy. So obviously tourism has been very, very much impacted by this pandemic. So how do you see the recovery in the tourism sector coming out of this? And maybe, it's too early to talk about recovery, but what are some of the initiatives that your government could be doing as we are trying to get to pivot out of crisis into recovery?
Well, when I was talking about the fact that I was in Vancouver a month ago, I went to Vancouver also because Destination Canada, the headquarter of the agency that I'm in charge of, which is also in charge of the promoting Canada's tourism brand to the world, is headquartered in Vancouver. And so I really think that the tourism sector was the canary in the coal mine. I think that they were the first hit, a hard hit, and they're in a dire, they're going through dire circumstances right now. I think what we have in mind in terms of supporting the tourism sector is obviously to make sure that the different options that we've presented as a government are applicable to the tourism sector. So that's why I've raised the issue of seasonality, seasonal businesses, and the issue of seasonality being taken into account in the context of the wage subsidy. But obviously we're looking at other options. I'm in charge of Western Diversification, the agency, the Economic Development Agency for the West. And I think that the tourism operators should definitely contact WD to really be able to get support. While there hasn't been an increase in budget of WD, I've repurposed some of the funds to support more the tourism sector. And also in terms of recovery, well, I think that we will want Canadians to discover their country. There were issues in the tourism sector beforehand that had to be dealt with, that were the fact that we were too much concentrated in our three big cities, which are Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal, and we had to support more of different regions. And also the tourism season was too much highly concentrated in the summer. So how can we support also tourism in the winter and the shoulder seasons? So these are things we're looking at as we're thinking of recovery.
And recognizing that we are only in the beginning of April, and these are unprecedented times with nobody has any kind of crystal ball to see when we are going to come out of this crisis and be more about return to business as usual. There is a question here about the timing and around recovery for the summer peak season. That is going to be a big test, I guess, if you will, for the tourism industry. Do you foresee that there's going to be recovery by then, or is it just much too soon to be able to make any kind of guesstimate here?
Well, Bridget, I would love to be able to answer your question, but at this time, what I can tell you is every single action we're taking right now will help us to flatten that curve. And it is fundamental for people to follow the very stringent rules that governments are putting in place and authorities are putting in place all across the country. And our best economic response right now is to actually follow the strict measures. And that's how we will be able to get out of this quickly, as quick as possible, and that there will not be another surge afterwards. And so, and the tourism sector is based on confidence, on the fact that people will want to discover their country, get a break a bit, and get out of the city and discover the beautiful places within BC. But that can happen if people are don't have the trust in the system and don't believe that we're out of this. So that's why we need to make sure that we're following the rules right now.
Thank you for that. I know lots of people would like to know when we can go back to normal, but it's just, it's very difficult to say. We are getting a lot of questions around some of the initiatives and measures that were announced by your colleague, Minister Morneau. So looking at the top of the Slido questions here, a question about the 75% wage subsidy. Can we claim it for employees with reduced pay or hours, or it's applicable if employees are kept only at 100%?
Okay, so this is a very good question. I don't want to induce anybody, I don't want to say something that would not be based on facts. So I'll make sure that my team and I come back to you on this. My understanding as of now, obviously, is to make sure that we are able to not only support the 75% of all wages, so maybe be temporary or permanent, but also that employers are there to support that 25%. That is key to make sure that we can keep our employees able to pay the rent or pay the mortgages or put food on their table. So, but we'll come back to you on that.
Thank you, Minister. And I think just recognition as well that as you and your colleagues are working around the clock to develop this policy, some of this is being developed as we're moving through this crisis, and you're getting more questions too. So don't be frustrated, people who are out there watching and listening, because the government is very much taking the feedback and then implementing that as the policy is being unrolled. So a question here about EI applicants who are moved into the CERB. So are they still able to collect some partial or casual hours? Is that allowed under the program?
So if you're on EI, you're on EI. And the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, the CERB, is really based on the fact that it was to cover people that would not necessarily fall under the EI system. And that was the idea. At this point, the Government of Canada, like I said, had no time to create new programs. And so the CERB, the CERB is really to make sure that we are looking at people, like I was saying, like the self-employed person that lost its contract because of COVID-19, or the person that didn't have access to EI because it didn't have enough hours, or the parent that is staying at home, or basically the person that is sick or taking care of a sick person. So that's the idea. And so if you're on EI, you're on EI and you have access to it.
And there's a couple of questions at the top there that really are sort of combined, and some of them I think really this has to do with the Employment Standards Act, which falls under BC jurisdiction, but around layoffs. Has there been thinking within the federal government about layoffs due to COVID-19, and under the section of the Act, would that be seen as an unforeseeable event?
See, I think at this point, the different jurisdictions across the country are looking at the new measures we've taken, and that the fact that yesterday we came up with some new modalities. And so I think at this point, you know, BC will have to take decisions as to how they apply their act, and whether potentially it is possible to still be within the law, and at the same time make sure that you take good decisions for your employees and also for your business. So these are conversations that need to happen between levels of government. And I think also that, you know, what I can take as away from this, and what can people take away from this, is if there are cases that don't fall into, you know, the system, I should know about it. I've talked to you about the way we calculate the losses, for example, or for example, if business owners are paid through dividends and not salaries, how can they have access to wage subsidies? These are things we're looking at. For other more particular issues, I think it's worth it that you talk to your accountant, or you talk also to your banker.
And I think what's important to note here is the interplay that's happening between federal jurisdiction and rules and policies that apply, and then you layer on the provincial jurisdiction and those kinds of policies, as well as municipalities. So understanding which fall under which and getting some advice on that is really important. I've got a question here, and it's really getting a more technical, some of the questions here on the 75% wage subsidy, but maybe what you could do is talk about the process as you're getting feedback from the business community. For example, are there going to be exceptions given the revenue? The second question there, the company is off 30% month to month, but not compared to last year. So as you're getting that kind of feedback, how is that factoring into the development of the policy?
Well, you know, we're taking it into consideration, and then we're adapting. So is the definition of the 30% loss perfect? I would love to say yes, but obviously there will be exceptions. And so, you know, that this is why, you know, we're taking into account the different realities that we're seeing. I've referred earlier in this conversation about the startup reality, or because of companies that maybe don't have a year of revenue to compare to. Or I'm very much aware, for example, that there's a very strong tech sector in Vancouver, and the fact that sometimes revenues are not really high, but you know, there's a lot of R&D that is put in place, and lots of people that are well paid that are part of the business. So these are things we're looking at, and you know, like I said, we did policies that would go well for 80% of businesses and people across the country, and now we're taking care of that 20%. And so the questions are valid. They're really good questions. I commend all of you for asking them. But you know, my team is on the line also, and we'll be taking notes.
I know one question that comes up continually is that some companies had to lay off people almost immediately around middle of March, or maybe that third week of March. And now that they've laid them off and the subsidy has been announced, how does that work? Do they need to hire those people back then, or does it apply to them? What will be the criteria needed?
Well, obviously, we really hope that people that were laid off are being rehired. That's the idea. And we've always used March 15 as the date of all our new policies, our new options. And so it's starting from March 15. If there were layoffs afterwards, it's retroactive. The wage subsidy program is retroactive to March 15. And so we hope that people will be able to rehire, businesses will be able to rehire. And at the same time, we hope that we are able to implement the wage subsidy, like I was saying, within the next weeks. We hope 3 weeks rather than 6 weeks. So that's for the wage subsidy. I know your question is not about the CERB, the Canada Emergency Response Benefit, but what we're trying to do with with this new program also is that starting next week, so April 6th, people need to be able to have a CRA account to have access to it. So if you're putting your employees through you know, this option, so they need to have a CRA account. Please go online to help them. They can go online and register, and through the CRA. You can go through the Canada.ca account and get there. Afterwards, what is important is we'll be sending either bank transfers within the 3 to 5 next days, or checks within the next 10 days of somebody having a CRA account and applying for the CERB.
Minister, we're almost out of time, but one final question. your government has been very quick to announce measures, and it is a multi-billion-dollar package. If this crisis continues and there continues to be significant economic impacts, will there be more measures announced by your government to support the business community?
Yes.
That was a fast and easy yes.
No, but Bridget, governments around the world are dealing with this issue. And we're, for the wage subsidy, for example, we look at what New Zealand was doing. And New Zealand put a cap on wage subsidy for a cap of $150,000 max per company. And within 3 days, they have to change their policy and continue their wage subsidy approach, but to broaden it. So we tried from the get-go to broaden it, but obviously, it seemed from the questions we need to adapt. And we're still in this stabilization, part of the crisis. We're at the beginning of the crisis. And so the idea is to make sure that people have access to wage subsidies. It's not as if we don't want people to have access to wage subsidies. We want people to use the tools that are at their disposition. And also, we very much know that our sectors that are more affected. The energy sector, the tourism sector, and some other sectors are more affected than others. And so we are looking at different scenarios right now. I think that what I can tell to you and your members is really contact WD, Western Diversification, because we can provide you with information and also some good feedback. And also, there will be a stimulus package. We will be bouncing back. And obviously, the government will be playing a role to reboot the economy. But meanwhile, what we need collectively to do is to be confident in the future, because our economy is, yes, based on, real data, direct measures, impacts. That's how our financial markets work. But our financial markets also work based on trust and public confidence and consumer confidence. I would say 2/3 of the indicators on which the financial markets are based on emotions and trust. And so my message to all of you is to make sure that, we are by your side while you're going through this very, very difficult and anxious time. We want you to have access to our programs and our different options, and we will be on the other side with you also, and there will be, I hope, rainbows on the other side.
Well, Minister, and I think your comment about feedback being a key part of this, and so to our members of the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, we need to hear from you about how these measures are working for you, the impact that you are noticing from COVID-19, and what further the Board of Trade and levels of government can do to support you through this. So we'll also be collecting that feedback, Minister, and sending it your way. Thank you for joining us today. I do appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Bridget. Continue your good work, and congrats to all your team. I know you are all working extremely hard right now.
Thank you, Minister. Stay well.
Thank you. You too. Stay healthy.
Now, if you would like to watch this webinar again, you can visit theboardoftrade.com and you will find it there. And we are going to continue these important conversations and stay connected. We are going to continue hosting our series of free webinars on navigating COVID-19. Over the next few days, we'll be bringing together experts to speak on a variety of topics such as adaptive leadership and contract performance. And we have also created a business resource page designed to provide toolkits, information, all the latest updates from the levels of government that will help businesses and individuals. And you'll find that at theboardoftrade.com as well on our COVID-19 business resource page. And this page will be updated as new information becomes available. Thank you to everyone for being part of today's webinar. We look forward to connecting again soon, and to finish with those wise words of Dr. Bonnie Henry: be kind, be calm, and be safe.